Hello everyone, welcome to the Spider Movies Industry Insights series. My name is Alex Collins and I'm a researcher here at Spider Movies. So this is the first episode of this Industry Insights series, which is essentially a short series of episodes aimed at providing young people, young filmmakers with a passion for the environment, with the knowledge of how to make their own content and how to get their voices heard, and particularly how to find their way into what is at the moment a pretty difficult industry to get into. So we're here with our exec producer, and we're going to go right back to the basics to really put you in the know about how the industry works. So today we're going to be covering the roles and responsibilities within the wildlife filmmaking industry. And with that, over to our exec producer, Fergus Bealey.
Alex, thank you very much indeed. And hello, everyone. So roles and responsibilities is a subject which I think is quite often misunderstood by people trying to get into the industry. And so it's worth covering in this session. I think that the most important thing is to recognize that there are kind of two different strands that move within a production. From a very simplified point of view, these run one along the researcher, assistant producer, producer, series producer, executive producer route, and the other one is very much a kind of an equally important line, but it is production secretary, production coordinator, production manager, unit manager, and finance manager, and really between those two are the components which make up the production. And I think that sometimes, people approach and they say, I really want to be a producer. And I think that, in fact, what they would probably be much better at, though they don't recognize it, is a role as a production coordinator or production manager. And to identify, I guess, the differences in those roles, I'll start with the researcher and going up that avenue. So the researcher role, at its simplest, is to offer assistant producers and producers information which will result exactly what they're going to see, where they're going to see it, and when they're going to see it. And it sounds like that's a very sort of massively simple thing to answer, but actually it can be quite a difficult thing to grasp. But those three things are critically important for a producer. Exactly what you're going to see, where you're going to see it, and when you're going to see it. And as you get good at that and you start answering those questions really well, you will inevitably end up going on location more and working as an assistant producer who also has to understand those three questions and ask those three questions, but does at least have more experience in knowing how to get those answers right. They do know that, for instance, there will be new factors like monsoon rains or contingency factors or issues regarding electronics in the jungle, in the rainforest, or whatever. And so they will also be involved in those same questions, but more likely to be on location. And then the producer role is very much bringing that together, certainly looking at all the component parts to a single program. So a single program being made up of maybe 10 5-minute sequences, and the producer has to conceive the whole program, conceive the way the sequences go from one to the next in a storytelling way. Whereas back downstream again, the assistant producer will be very much responsible for one or more sequences, and a researcher is also likely to be looking at one or more of those sequences. So the researcher assistant producer role is very much looking at delivering sequences, 5-minute sequences, and when they're good at that, they may be given a whole film, and the producer's looking at the whole film and delivering those the complete storyline. The producer is also responsible for bringing together the team, choosing the camera operators, choosing the musician, choosing the graphics, and again, bringing in all those style components. Going upstream again, the series producer is going to have to oversee not just the individual components of each program, but how those components fit within the series. So they'll need to make sure that there aren't any kind of repeat elements across the series. They'll have to make sure that there's a continual style, maybe with the series titles, with the series music, the same with the end credits and the music over the end credits. They're really holding that together. And then the executive producer is the one who has, I guess, the greatest contact with the commissioning editors, so that if there's any difference in thought between one commissioning editor on one side of the Atlantic and another commissioning editor, another co-producer in Britain or another country, then the executive producer is the one that holds that communication together to make sure that any differences of thought, any kind of differences of feelings in the script or whatever, are getting those thoughts chiseled out at an early stage so there aren't any misunderstandings. So that is the chain from researcher to executive producer. Parallel to that is the chain which is very much in support, but also integral to that line of input, starting with production secretary, who will be very responsible for ensuring that the post-production delivery is well scheduled, that there are no lumps and bumps in terms of where materials need to be, maybe the collection of equipment, and ensuring that the equipment is with the camera operator, that the camera operator has the right production schedules, has the right carnets, has the hire car, is fully organized to go on the overseas filming trip. Likewise, the production coordinator will look very hard at each filming trip schedule to make sure that it's well organized, that unnecessary costs are eliminated, that health and safety aspects are well thought through, that there are up-to-date first aid kits, that hire cars have been booked that are the right size to take the amount of equipment, that the post-production house has got all the right equipment ready to be collected on the Monday morning so that the team can get up to the airport or whatever. So the production coordinator is looking at the costings, mainly of each filming trip. And so the production coordinator will be working closely with the assistant producer and the researcher, if they're the ones who are inputting information from the ground, like which are the best hotels to stay in, which are the ones nearest the location. Are there any hire cars available? Are there Hertz or Avis or Europe car availability at the destination airports? Those are all the things that can be worked out on a recce by the researcher or the assistant producer. And then the production coordinator has to look at how the costing for each of the sequences might then be challenged by the overall budget. And so then they will meet with the next person, which is the production manager, to look at the program budget. And the production manager might well say, well, look, we've only got 100,000 or 200,000 for this episode. And the filming trips that you've worked on are still too high. They're not feasible unless you can go back to the producer and say, can we cut down the number of camera days? If we can halve the number of camera days, we can afford this trip, otherwise we can't. And the producer will say, well, we can halve the camera days, but that means that we are really minimizing, or should I say maximizing, the risk that we won't achieve the objective, which is quite a critical bit of natural history behavior. So then we all get together again with the researcher and say to the researcher, is it absolutely the last week in June that this activity occurs? Is it a critical window dependent on a full moon? Or is it a critical window dependent on some other factor? You know, can we really bring it down? Can we halve the time that we're on location? And maybe a sensible solution, which the production coordinator or the production manager would come up with, would be, well, look, why don't you go ahead, assistant producer, get on the location. We'll have everyone ready to depart in the UK, or we'll be working with a local crew, which will save a lot of money. And then when we know that everything's happening the way it should be happening, green light go, we'll send the crew out, which is a very common sense way of doing this. If one can, I guess, have the flexibility to send a crew with that kind of speed. So upstream again from the production coordinator, you have the production manager that we discussed, talking about the overall program budget, and the production manager will be reporting up to the unit manager. And a large production company will have a unit manager who will be overseeing any number of different projects which have been commissioned by the production company. And they can say, for instance, well, look, we've got 5 projects now, all of which require an offline edit. And it's madness not for us to buy our own editing suites and or our own cameras on the basis that we're spending so much money on hiring these cameras across all these various productions. Or maybe we can do an output deal with the musician on the basis that we're delivering 6 1-hours. You know, let's look at volume deals in terms of delivery of music, or volume deals in use of some of the cameras or equipment. So the unit manager has got an oversight right across the company. They've got an oversight working with the managing director, who will be responsible for some of these key financial decisions regarding how people are allocated, how resources are allocated, how, rather than going from contract, one starts hiring people as staff so that they're allocated across various projects. So I think, you know, for the first session, that's probably a good place to close me just going on about it, and open back up to you, Alex, to you, Amole, to see if there are any questions that either of you have got to ask.
Yeah, well, thanks for that, Fergus. That was very interesting and definitely hopefully started everyone off on the right point. And as you say, probably the right time to introduce Amélie Biroir, my colleague, fellow young filmmaker and media student. And Amélie, did you have any questions?
I do actually. I have a question regarding the production stream that you spoke about, from researcher to an executive producer. I'm assuming that under one producer, a producer is in charge of a whole film or an episode of a series?
Yes, that's right.
So, and if there are assistant producers which are responsible for multiple sequences, so there are multiple assistant producers and multiple researchers?
That's correct. On a big series, one would see probably twice as many assistant producers and researchers to the number of producers.
The researcher's role sounds very important and very, very serious. I mean, if you're saying that if I'm just starting out in the industry, then getting in as a researcher, isn't that quite difficult?
I would say that if you can prove that you are able to deliver the information that I said was necessary to be a good researcher, you can get in quite quickly. If you've got some really good solutions, like if I'm making a film on sharks, and you know I'm making a film on sharks, and you approach me and you say, I know that if you are in Eleuthera in the Bahamas, In the last week in April, you will see specifically this behavior of one shark interacting with another shark in a way that I know the people who are working with sharks, who are studying this bit of behavior, it's not been filmed before, it's very unusual, and I know that we can do it. I would probably say, Emily, I have 10 days where I can pay you to investigate this further. And if in that 10 days you are clearly capable of maybe identifying little clips on YouTube where the behavior can be seen by me as well, and or introducing me over a Zoom call with someone who is working on a boat in that location, and yes, they confirm what you are suggesting, you will undoubtedly get a contract, and within a short period of time it will be extended, because you will inevitably be on that particular shoot. And I think this is how researchers actually get their feet in the door. They must come up with solutions, and the solutions are generally ideas which are sequence ideas that are relevant to films that you, the researcher, know the producer is making. So that you're just going straight into providing, a solution for today.
Okay.
Well,
Any other questions?
There were some great questions, so feel free to jump in if you have any more. Fergus, I suppose a question from my side would be, who gets the creative freedom on the researcher, assistant producer route? So obviously the producer, as you said, is the one who selects the researchers and the cameramen. Is he then saying, is he or she, I should say, then saying to the researcher, research this exact thing for me, and to the cameramen, camerawomen, go and film these exact shots? Or is he trusting them to come up with good stories and good sequences themselves?
I think there's a great opportunity for a good researcher to really show what they're worth creatively by delivering to either the assistant producer or the producer a storyboard, which does identify that they're thinking visually, they're thinking creatively, and that they've thought through these things, so that they know that, by sketching out in a storyboard the imagery of the sharks, for instance, and the imagery topside or underwater or whatever it's going to be, of the way the sequence comes together, the more they can show that they can see it, the more likely it is that actually the producer will give them an assistant producer credit. Because that's all you're really looking for as a researcher, as many credits as you can get on a major broadcaster that says you have researched this program. And if you're capable of delivering the sequence in a way that the assistant producer would normally deliver it, then you will get an assistant producer credit. And I would say that, the whole career progression is really a kind of, not a race, but it's an attempt to reach a credit which buys you like a currency to your next contract or job opportunity. And quite a lot of researchers wonder why they're stuck in a desk for 2 years. And to be honest, it's very often because they're not doing more than delivering to the producer a stack of scientific papers that kind of do ultimately say that in the last week of May on a Luther Island in the Bahamas, you can get this bit of behavior, but they're not summarizing it in a visual way. And as I said, those 3 key questions are, the more you can identify exactly what the answers are, the more you can really pin that, the faster the route will be to you being a very good researcher and probably an assistant producer.
I have another question. At what point does this research start? Does it start after an idea has been greenlit, or before it is being pitched?
Well, that's a good question. I think that it's a bit of a chicken and egg because, I mean, we've just delivered film treatments for a series of 3 films, and each treatment has been about 4 pages long. And in those treatments, they include stories which I have researched as a producer, along with input from some other researchers. But at this stage, it's probably best because I as a producer, have the vision to see how to pitch the program and the series. I'm putting in the majority of the research. But then when it becomes a commission, then I can employ you two as researchers to develop those treatments. And you may well say to me, actually, those sequences that you mentioned, they tell the story, but it may be there's a way to continue to tell that story, but with a better example. And as a researcher, you are probably looking for the most recent science, the best visual illustration, perhaps in a clever way, something that's slightly surprising. And it's possible for us to then, all of us, to go wholeheartedly into the research and have a pre-production phase, which is nearly entirely research. And over the series, we may be researching for 3 months in order to identify exactly what we need to be filming, where and when, so that we then have meetings with the production coordinator to identify the costs for each of those sequences, and to have meetings with the production manager, who will be saying, yes, I am happy that with a budget of £500,000 per episode, this is deliverable. But even at that earlier stage, the producer has to have a broad understanding of the bracket of budgets that they're to be delivering in. And once the film is commissioned, you can then hire the real experts, the production managers, the production coordinators, to investigate the real detail of the financing. And likewise, really top researchers that can find much better stories. And my role as producer is to tell a story. But in terms of the way to tell that story, I need your input as researchers and assistant producers.
Brilliant. Well, yeah, thanks for all those answers, Fergus. I think, to be honest, that's probably been a really good place to start for people who are looking for a bit of initial insight into the industry. And thanks to Amelie for some fantastic questions there. And I think if you agree, then maybe this is a good place to end episode number 1 of the series. Great. In which case, to everyone watching, I hope you've enjoyed this first episode. Hope you've found it very useful and very interesting. And I should also say that if you have any questions that you'd like to ask Fergus in perhaps a future episode regarding anything that we've spoken about or anything else to do with storytelling in the industry, then make sure to follow us on social media. The links and the tags to our socials will be up on the screen about now. And send us a message on there, and we can definitely try and get your questions answered. Until next time, thanks for watching.